radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 41, recorded on Friday, June 18th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we'll talk about the history of the United States' newest federal holiday, tomorrow, which is National Independence Day, Juneteenth Day.
Happy Juneteenth Day, Joe.
Happy Juneteenth, Jason. But first, the headlines.
The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
Up first in headlines, Biden met with Putin in the Geneva summit, which is the first time Biden met with Putin since he has taken on the presidency. This was kind of a big deal. It was among elitist circles. For most, it was actually that interesting.
Yeah, not much came out of it, honestly.
No, although I did find it very interesting because Biden's administration did explicitly say they did not want to have a joint press conference because last time in Helsinki, Trump was asked explicitly by a reporter if he believed the, I think it was the CIA's reports about Russia tampering with the 2016 election and whatnot. And in front of the entire world and in front of Putin, he said no, he did not believe his own CIA's reports and he believes the word of Putin instead.
Well, he was a Putin fanboy. Didn't he write him like a Dear Putin letter before he became president?
Sure, let's go with that. Biden and Putin discussed a wide variety of things during the summit, such things as human rights, the safety of Alexei Navalny. You may remember him from a previous episode, who is Putin's most visible and popular opponent, who's currently in jail right now, by the way. And then also, Biden did claim that he bluntly confronted Putin on the cyber attacks made on the United States.
That was kind of the biggest news.
Yeah.
To come out of this is, the attack that went to the oil pipeline.
Yep.
And I believe there were some other recent large profile businesses that were attacked.
Now, the problem is he did not say how Putin responded, though. So we have actually no idea what transpired behind those doors. And then also one of the main and possibly only real outcomes of Wednesday's talks was the agreement to task experts to, quote, work on specific understandings on what's off limits and to follow up on specific cases of cybersecurity.
It basically saying without saying that he knows Putin is responsible for the attacks and saying, look, infrastructure is off the table.
Pretty much.
Yep.
It's like America's infrastructure. You can't do that. You can attack you attack our McDonald's. I don't care.
The private businesses, that's one thing. But, honestly,
there's a great website
free market,
for
right?
Donald Trump out there that you can just hack all you want. I'm sure Frank.com has some pretty low security. There was also a lot of reports over Biden actually acting pretty hostile towards a couple of reporters after the summit, and reporters absolutely freaked out about it, but then Biden apologized and nothing happened.
Presidents are always supposed to be nice to the media, Joe.
Oh,
That's
yeah?
a American tradition.
Well, what are your thoughts on this? So a lot of reporters online stood up for the reporters that Biden lashed out at. Again, he did apologize for it later, saying that this is pretty much the same thing that they went through with Donald Trump and that we need to stand up for ourselves and make sure that we don't get abused by politicians.
I think symmetrical warfare is on the table. So if the reporter is hostile to the president, as long as it's kind of in line with that same temperature, I'm fine with it. I don't think they should always have to be bashful, and the media shouldn't always have to be bashful either. Mm-hmm. You know, if they really want to go at something, they should be free to do it, and if they get the same in return, that should be fine as well. You know, maybe not call them the enemy of the people. That would kind of be a little bit above what we're talking about, but you get what you give would be fine with me.
I mean, I agree with that. It should be like an adversarial relationship between politicians and
if there's
the
a
media.
reason for it, yeah.
Which I think just in general, it should be. Like, they're not supposed to be friends. That's the idea. So I have absolutely no problem with reporters going after politicians in a professional or civil way as best as they can, but asking the hard-hitting questions that everyone wants reporters to ask. But if they also ask something stupid or they just straight up troll like a lot of right-wing reporters do, sure, make fun of them, humiliate them, whatever you want to do. Fine. I have no problem with that at all. And I think what you said is a big issue we have right now, where Trump did such damage to how we view media personalities or reporters and journalists in our country that now any attack on the media seems like it's what Donald Trump was doing. And then on top of that, you also see journalists responding saying that because Donald Trump was so bad and we we were so hard on Donald Trump, we also have to be super hard on Joe Biden to even look like we're objective, which is also kind of not true either.
Agreed.
So all in all, nothing really too much happened. It's what you actually expected when a president meets another foreign official. Usually nothing happens. It's boring. My God, Jason, I am so happy that's boring.
Not a huge scandal coming out of this
Oh
one.
my goodness. It's so great. The fact that the big scandal, all this was the fact that Biden lashed out at a reporter and then apologized, made me so happy.
Talking about scandals, let's move on to our next story.
And crazy presidents.
According to recently released emails, Donald Trump pressured top Department of Justice officials to overturn the election results, confirming what we all believed anyway.
Yeah, this is crazy. And I know, like, right before the recording, we were kind of going through these documents. Oh my God.
The Italian stuff.
Oh, and we'll talk about it. So for a quick recap, between December 2020 and early January, former President Trump and his allies, including Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, repeatedly pressured senior Justice Department officials to investigate baseless conspiracy theories and challenge the results of the 2020 election, at least according to these documents released by the House Oversight Committee. According to the documents, on December 14th, the day of the Electoral College met to certify the results in all 50 states, Trump's assistant sent then Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen materials on, quote, talking points about debunked election fraud claims in Michigan.
The same ones we talked about during the Arizona fraud episode, where it was a data mismatch because some voting machines had local elections that other voting machines didn't because they were updated right before the election, and that error was quickly found and corrected. But this is like really the only evidence they have in this entire 300-page document. The only thing they keep pointing over and over again that's just not pure speculation and just things that people said they saw is these votes that were changed in one specific county in Michigan that accounted for a very little vote total compared to the total obviously in Michigan is a very small county and was corrected.
And was caught and corrected. Literally.
Before the results were announced. It didn't impact the overall race because it was corrected. They know where the glitch came from. It was human error.
Yep.
It wasn't anything to do with Dominion, which is why Dominion is suing everyone that kept pushing this claim because they didn't have anything to do with it and they're being slandered by all of these people. And again, did not impact the election at all. And that's the only thing they have actual like data, like they point to that glitch or that misrepresentation of the data over and over and over and over again throughout all of the pages of this document. Everything else is just
crazy.
It is insane. It's Rudy Giuliani. Just think of Rudy Giuliani and everything he's said over the past couple months. That's what it is.
And then literally 40 minutes later after the email was sent, Trump announced that Attorney General Bill Barr, who also spoke out against the election fraud claims, would step down and be replaced.
And said that it was his personal decision and was already planned ahead of time and had nothing to do with the election.
Then, on December 29th, Trump sent a 54-page legal brief demanding that the Supreme Court declare that the Electoral College votes cast in 6 states Trump lost and, quote, cannot be counted.
Including Wisconsin.
Right. And that, quote, a special election must be held in each state. What?
You know, it's totally against the Constitution, but it's what Donald Trump wants.
What? What is this?
He loves the Constitution.
Oh,
though.
my goodness.
My favorite part, the emails from White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
On 5 occasions, he directed Department of Justice officials to investigate baseless fraud claims, including a conspiracy alleging that electoral data was changed in Italian facilities with the knowledge and oversight of the CIA.
And we read these letters. My God.
Translated from Italian,
Yep.
It has to do with satellites and military encryption technology
To literally change what was it? The result.
Yeah, they just changed the result.
Yep.
From the winner of the election from Trump to Biden.
No. The clear winner, Donald Trump, to Joe Biden.
In a completely unbiased manner, clearly Donald Trump won, and that result was changed to Joe Biden.
And then to further elaborate, Mark Meadows sent a YouTube video.
Which unfortunately has been taken down.
We couldn't
I
watch
wanted
it.
to watch it.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll be able to track it down in the next couple days. Somebody had to have saved it.
Oh my God. But again, this just shows how bad these conspiracies and fraud claims went.
Rosen and Donahue openly mocked the evidence presented by Mark Meadows, and specifically that YouTube video, as crazy.
Yeah.
And they even said when they got more evidence or different evidence emailed to them, well, it's better than the last one, but that's not saying much. These are the people that literally got their position because they were willing to push this fight that the election was fraudulent, and even they don't believe it.
Right. But these are the literal leaders of our country.
The Attorney General of the United States.
My God. And up next, we have some Supreme Court news for you. First up, we have in a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court granted religious freedom,
as they always
a win
seem to,
or something, a major victory for religious freedom in this country, where you cannot practice your religion at all without being persecuted. That's clear what it was about, right?
Yep. So this is a ruling against the Philadelphia requirement that Catholic Social Services, which is a company, abide by the city's non-discrimination policy regarding same-sex couples. So this has to do with adoption of children.
And they were turning same-sex couples away.
Which is, of course, unconstitutional. The judgment was in favor of Catholic Social Services, basically citing
the First Amendment.
Yeah, but it was in a way that it said that the city wasn't wrong for having that policy, but the way they enforced it was wrong, which did not overturn the precedent that the idea of the law is based on. And this is getting, I guess, a little bit more technical in a legal situation than I'm comfortable with. But basically, if you're a crazy religious person, fundamentalist, you would have wanted this decision to basically overturn the precedents that you can not discriminate against someone based on your religious beliefs. That's what they were looking for. That everyone would be able to just say, you're gay, I don't agree with that, it's my religious belief, so I can discriminate against you. And that's what, even though he was part of the unanimous decision, definitely Alito was upset about, reportedly, because that's what he wanted. He wanted this decision to say that the idea of religious discrimination does not exist. And instead, they basically gave a very narrow ruling that only applied in this specific circumstance, did not overturn precedent, and would not apply to anyone else. And honestly, Philadelphia could easily correct this by just changing the wording of their law slightly and still be fine in the future, not allowing religious discrimination against LGBTQ community, which is not what you would want if you were a bigoted religious fundamentalist.
So what does that mean now for future foster care in Philadelphia?
It really doesn't change anything. It means that the Catholic Social Services will get their damages, whatever that was, in this ruling, and that for now they'll be able to discriminate. But like I said,
once the language is changed, in
Philadelphia
the ordinances,
does not have to do much to just correct the wording of their law, and they will be able to exclude Catholic Social Services from discriminating, or at least getting funding to discriminate in the future. You know, I'm surprised. I don't think anyone mentioned the irony of the Catholic Social Services saying that they didn't feel safe putting children in the care of anyone else, given their history of rape and molestation and sexual abuse across decades and
worldwide,
thousands of children.
Yeah. Well, we do have some good news for you. Even though that other one isn't so great, we also just found out that the Affordable Care Act won again in the Supreme Court for the third time.
So this was a standing ruling.
It was. Lots of narrow rulings.
Which, and it's funny because it is actually the GOP's fault that they lost this case. But this was a case brought by multiple states, including Texas, of course. And because the GOP in 2017, I believe it was.
Yes, that is correct.
Struck down the individual mandate that said you had to pay a fee if you did not have health insurance, that there's zero cost applied to all of the states if they do not offer the Affordable Care health insurance. So they do not have standing to sue because there are no damages. There's no possible way they could be injured by this law.
Well, and literally, I have the quote right here. In the concurring opinion written by Justice Stephen Breyer, it says, to have standing, a plaintiff must allege personal injury fairly traceable to the defendant's allegedly unlawful conduct and likely to be redressed by the requested relief. Simply put, you have to be directly injured to have any physical standing itself. And since these states, like Jason said, faced no personal injury or financial issues, they had no standing in this case.
And that basically marks the end of the legal challenges to the Affordable Care Act. It will at this point take an act of Congress.
Yes. Well, and most scholars are saying that with these three decisions now, it'd be very difficult to actually overturn it in the courts.
So that again highlights the importance of the election next year. If you like protections for pre-existing conditions,
go vote.
If you like the fact that dependent children can stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26,
go vote.
That is very important because those two things, had this Supreme Court ruling gone a different way and would have struck down the Affordable Care Act, those would be gone. Despite them being incredibly popular, despite Republicans' repeated assurances that they would not get rid of those provisions, the GOP-led lawsuits would do exactly that. They are lying.
Yep.
Just like President Trump lied over and over and over again when he said he had his own healthcare plan.
Well, and that's kind of a big thing with this too, where you see Kevin McCarthy responding afterwards saying that, well, this is still not undoing all the damage that have been caused by the Affordable Care Act and that all the lies are being said because of the Affordable Care Act or whatever he was going on about. But he specifically did not say that they had plans to repeal and replace it.
Because they don't.
Well, they haven't. They've never had a plan.
They are going to replace it with buy your health care, you poor bastard. We don't care about you. I'm rich. I have government insurance. I don't care. All of my friends and donors are rich. They don't care about insurance. What's insurance? Drop in the bucket.
Right.
I don't care that it's financially crippling to you. And if you get sick, you could lose your house and your car and basically be homeless. I don't care. That's not my problem. I'm taken care of. And everyone I care about is taken care of. That's the message from the GOP when it comes to healthcare. That's their plan. That's their philosophy. They do not care about anyone. So please keep that in mind.
And go vote.
And vote.
And finally, we have a Marjorie Taylor Greene segment for you all.
I feel like I should have like circus noises piped in here. Honk, honk, honk.
Congresswoman, official Congresswoman of the United States, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Paid for by the citizens of Georgia.
Who also just found out that the Holocaust was bad.
Yeah, turns out it was bad. It's not actually like wearing a mask.
Okay, we're going to take a quick side to our story. Did you see that press conference at all?
I did not watch it.
Okay, we're gonna talk about this then really quick. So Marjorie Taylor Greene took a trip to the Holocaust Museum in D.C. Afterwards, she felt compelled to have a press conference to further apologize.
And didn't she go to a concentration camp when she was like in high school?
I have no idea.
Didn't she say that when she was 19? Her dad took her?
Which is even worse.
And yeah, she couldn't figure it out then. She was definitely paying attention.
But where she literally had to say, I now realize that my comments about masks and vaccines are not equatable to the Holocaust.
And then she immediately, after that was over, called the Democrats just like the Nazis.
Yep.
Showing that she really did learn and that she wasn't just doing that because people made her do that. She really meant it.
But besides learning about how bad the Holocaust was, she's been busy introducing the Fire Fauci Act with several other Republicans in the House.
I refuse to even look at this.
Too late, I did.
Yeah, you can tell everybody about it.
All right.
I'm going to just sit back and do something else.
All right, sounds good. So I read the entirety of the Fire Fauci Act. It's very short. It took about 5 minutes to read. For an actual act of Congress is pretty dang short. So in their findings, they talk about how Dr. Anthony Fauci earns over $400,000 a year. That's finding number 1 of their 11 findings. Their other findings talk about how, well, other government employees don't get paid that high, and that
unless you're a football coach.
and then go on to say, again, in their findings, this is a finding in their bill. Dr. Anthony Fauci has continually failed to provide Americans with accurate information about COVID-19 and has shown distrust in the American private sector and American ingenuity. In March 2020, Dr. Anthony Fauci told Americans not to wear masks, noting there's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you are in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little better, and it might even block a droplet, but it is not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often, there are unintended consequences. People keep filling with the mask, and they keep touching their faces. Now, more than a year later, he's telling Americans to continue quarantining as much as possible and to wear a mask, maybe even into the year 2022.
That irresponsible jerk.
What is this? Really? Are we still on the whole, well, he said you didn't have to wear a mask before. Why did he change his mind?
And even reading that quote, it was like, yeah, we thought that the virus was spread more by contact. And then as we learned, it was much more likely to be spread via droplets and not so much with contact. The focus moved from, oh, don't touch your face, to wear a mask, stay away from people.
Well, and this wasn't a secret. We knew this. Everybody knew. Well, I don't want to say everybody. Most rational people knew this.
You mean Asian countries?
I mean, yeah. The bill goes on to say that they are reducing the salary of the director of the NIAID to $0 and that it will remain $0 until Dr. Anthony Fauci leaves and the president appoints a new director of the NIAID, excluding Dr. Anthony Fauci. See, they found that loophole.
But what if he changes his name?
Oh, man.
Now he's going to be one step ahead. Of course, this bill has no chance.
Play chess, not checkers, my friend.
This totally rational and reasonable bill will not pass the House.
Nope, but I thought it was really funny.
And it's a waste of government time and taxpayer money. I thought that's what the Republicans don't like.
No, not anymore. Now they're all about crazy conspiracies now. They don't care about the deficit anymore. Are you kidding me?
Can we impeach Trump again? I feel like we could with those documents that were released. I'm all for that. That was fun. We should keep doing it.
Just make it like an annual thing.
Yeah.
Well, technically it's 2 years. So every 2 years, like kind of like just like the Winter Olympics. We just impeach Trump every 2 years. I'm sure there's always going to be something.
Nobody tell Joe the Winter Olympics is every 4 years.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
If that's it for headlines, let's move to the main segment. Something I'll enjoy talking about a lot more than Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Racists.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
Our main story of the day, let's talk about the history of Juneteenth and how it has become a new federal holiday. The first federal holiday since 1983, which is racists' other least favorite federal holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Was that government overreach too?
I'm sure. We already have President's Day. That could get confusing. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's start with the actual recent news about Juneteenth. I think that's a good place to start because that's kind of talking about why we're doing this in the first place.
It is officially Juneteenth National Independence Day. It's been historically known as Jubilee Day, Black Independence Day, and Emancipation Day.
And it was officially signed by Joe Biden yesterday.
We have a quote from President Biden as he made remarks upon signing the bill into law. "We must understand that Juneteenth represents not only the commemoration of the end of slavery in America more than 150 years ago, but the ongoing work to have to bring true equity and racial justice into American society, which we can do. In short, this day doesn't just celebrate the past, it calls for action today." Joe, I love whoever's writing Biden's speeches. I hope that he can live up to that speechwriter.
But can we talk about the process before Biden signed it?
Sure can.
All right. So it actually started in the Senate, and it was fairly bipartisan in the Senate, except Wisconsin's pride, Senator Ron Johnson.
This was proposed last year and would have passed except for the objections of Wisconsin's least favorite son, Ron Johnson.
And it was initially about how he didn't think that workers should be let off for Juneteenth.
Yes, it was all about the cost of having a federal holiday and having all of those freeloading federal employees, all those greasy, no good federal employees that get paid by the government. Ew, who does that?
Well, and I literally
what kind of bum just lives off the government teat?
Well, I
as a U.S. senator. would never freeload off of the taxpayers.
Especially since I think he's the richest Republican in the Senate right now.
Pretty amazing if he is, because there's a lot of generationally wealthy Republicans.
Right. But I do have a statement from him on Tuesday saying, quote, resolutions recognizing the significance of and celebrating Juneteenth have unanimously passed with my support in Congress every year. Last year, a bill was introduced to celebrate Juneteenth by providing an additional paid holiday for 2 million federal employees at a cost of $600 million per year.
How will the federal government ever pay $600 million? It's so much. That costs like as much as one missile.
But that's a really useful missile, though, man. It's not the same thing.
Sits on a pile with all the other missiles.
They attempted to pass the bill without debate or amendment process. Although I strongly support celebrating emancipation, I object to the cost and lack of debate.
Debate? What would the debate be?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
If the only issue is the cost, and honestly, the cost is nothing compared to the federal budget, what is there to debate?
I don't know. But he inevitably did vote yes for it, paving the way for it to go to the House.
Has nothing to do with the fact that he's up for re-election next year.
Well, yeah, that too. And only 14 Republicans voted no.
All white Republican men.
Including one from Wisconsin.
Of course. Tom Tiffany. Piece of garbage. Come on up north. You can do better than that. But we've got the list. And they are Republican Mo Brooks from Alabama, Arizona colleagues Andy Biggs and noted racist Paul Gosar, Scott Desjardins of Tennessee, Doug LaMalfa and Tom McClintock from California, Mike Rogers from Alabama, Ralph Norman from South Carolina, Andrew Clyde from Georgia. And for these next three, next four, we have quotes. So I want to read their quotes after I give you their names. There was Matt Rosendale from Montana.
I'm ready for a good, well thought out argument. Here
His
we go.
statement, let's call an ace, which,
Sounds
oh
good.
man, he's lucky he didn't use the much more popular idiom there. Woo! This is an effort by the left to create a day out of whole cloth. Just creating it
What?
out of whole cloth.
What?
Never celebrated before in the history of this country.
Oh, God. Okay.
To celebrate identity politics
Celebrate identity politics.
as part of its larger efforts to make critical race theory the reigning ideology of our country.
The reigning ideology of our country.
King critical race theory, they'll call it. Since I believe in treating everyone equally, regardless of race, and that we should be focused on what unites us rather than our differences, I will vote no.
On this bipartisan bill.
Then we have Representative Ronnie Jackson of Texas, and we'll get into the history in a second, but
Texans should know better.
Texas is the first state to have recognized Juneteenth Day as a state holiday. It comes from Texas. It should be a source of pride for Texans that this started in their state. But for some reason, we have two Texas representatives who voted against it. Ronnie Jackson had to say for himself,
Let's do it.
we have enough federal holidays right now. I just don't see the reason in doing it. I don't think it rises to the level I'm going to support it. Wow. Sorry,
What?
black people. I don't like your holiday. So I'm
Literally.
not going to vote for it.
Well, okay, let's talk about this. What benefit for us, like for the general American people, have other really like obscure federal holidays have done? Like, I don't want to say obscure, but we'll say like things like President's Day. We don't do anything for President's Day.
Nope.
So what's
Columbus
the point?
Day.
Right, or Indigenous Peoples Day or whatever. I think it's both of them now. So, like, why? I'm sure he would support Columbus Day. I'm sure he would probably say, it's Christopher Columbus
I'm
Day.
guessing all 14 of these representatives loves
Christopher
Columbus Day.
Yeah, kidding me. Or what's the other one got to say?
His fellow Texan, Chip Roy. We've got a guy in the House of Representatives named Chip.
Okay, the fact that Chip Roy is his name just makes me think that something's really bad is going to happen.
And-
I'm already concerned.
His statement, Juneteenth should be commemorated as the expression of the realization of the end of slavery in the United States.
Period. End of story.
That
Just
should have
stop
been it.
right there. You got it.
and I commend those who worked for its passage.
Oh my God, this is great.
Still
Don't
good.
go on. This is perfect. I have so much respect for Chip right now.
Well, here it comes.
No, I don't want to hear it.
I could not vote for this bill, however,
Okay.
because the holiday should not be called Juneteenth National Independence Day, but rather Juneteenth National Emancipation or Freedom or Otherwise Day. Or whatever.
Or, independence.
This name needlessly divides our nation on a matter that should instead bring us together by creating a separate Independence Day based on the color of one's skin.
Oh.
Actually, I would argue it's the real Independence Day, but we've
man.
got a similar argument.
Or freedom or otherwise.
We have a similar argument from Thomas Massey of Kentucky. I fully support creating a day to celebrate the abolition of slavery, a dark portion of our nation's history. However, which nothing good's going to come of that, naming this day National Independence Day will create confusion and push Americans to pick one of those 2 days as their Independence Day based on their racial identity. Why can't we name this Emancipation Day and come together as Americans and celebrate that day together as Americans? So these are two people with the same arguments, probably sharing the same half of a brain, too. People are going to get confused because we call it Independence Day. Now, I will agree, Emancipation Day is also a very good name for a day.
Sure.
And historically, it's been called that. But calling it Independence Day, they did that for a reason.
Well, where slaves gained their independence?
When it was actually independence. But I'll give you a quote from Frederick Douglass that he gave in a speech on July 5th, 1852.
All right.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity.
Are you telling me that Frederick Douglass hated
Why
America?
couldn't he just come together as a nation to celebrate?
I'm really sick of Frederick Douglass's identity politics right now.
Independence Day. Why does he have to be so divisive, Joe? So I have a solution. I propose that we change the name of the 4th of July holiday so that we can avoid confusion for stupid Republicans.
Okay.
To National Rich White Male Landowners Not Having to Pay Taxes to the King of England Day.
Oh, okay.
That would be much more honest because they were not enslaved. They did not lack any freedom. They were not forced to work for free. They did not have their children stolen from them, never to see them again, to be sold off in auction. They did not have their families torn apart. They were not lynched and beaten by people who claimed to own them as property. They just didn't want to pay taxes to the King of England anymore. That's real struggle, Joe. That's the real fight for independence, is to not want to pay taxes anymore, not to claim your humanity back from people who denied it to you your entire life. No, to not have to give money to a monarch in order to run your extremely lucrative business in which you also own people. Those were the real freedom fighters, the slave owners.
And just to add two more conservative voices to the mix, we also did have Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's BS newspaper or whatever they are.
Media company,
I guess. Tweeting out saying what was actually accomplished by making Juneteenth a national holiday.
In some ways, I agree with him.
Well, and we'll talk about that. We also have Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA.
Also a noted racist.
Yep. Repeating some of the same BS talking points, saying Lincoln knew America's founding was July 4th, 1776. He knew that was the day our amazing nation made a step from, quote, ideal to reality. Juneteenth is an affront to the unity of July 4th. We now have two summer holidays, and one of them is based on race. Shame on the GOP for supporting this.
Yeah, one of them was based on race.
I wonder why one of them is based on race.
You know, the one that was based on race was the 4th of July because only one race was free.
But here's why this is the same stupid argument of like, well, if there are historically black colleges and universities, why aren't there white colleges and universities?
All of them.
I wonder why there had to be historically black colleges and universities. I wonder why there had to be a Juneteenth in the first place and why it's predominantly focused on race. But putting that aside, let's actually talk about...
Let's talk about the real hero of Juneteenth Day, Joe.
Who's the real hero?
Donald Trump.
Why?
Well, last year, I don't know if you remember, Donald Trump, while in his re-election bid, had scheduled a rally on June 19th in Tulsa, Oklahoma, site of the Tulsa Race Massacre. You know, and not an important date for anybody. Just picked a random date, June 19th. Nothing's going on that day.
In Tulsa.
Yeah, nothing that would maybe be important to Tulsa specifically. Donald Trump claimed ignorance to the historical significance of June 19th, telling the Wall Street Journal during an interview that it was ultimately a black Secret Service agent who filled him in on the date's significance. You know, the only black person Donald Trump knows, the one who's paid to stand near him.
But what about Ben Carson?
He's paid to stay away from
Donald
Trump. And he was probably asleep anyway. You guys are very tired all the time. But the president told the Journal that for all the backlash, I did something good. I made Juneteenth very famous. It's actually an important event, an important time. But nobody had ever heard of it. Now, I'll ask you right now, Joe, did you hear of Juneteenth before Donald Trump's rally last year?
I may have.
And I definitely have, despite the fact that we do live in a northern state. And we'll get into this in the history. Wisconsin does have a long history of celebrating Juneteenth Day.
Although, and I don't want to give him any defenses here, I'm sure if you actually polled white Americans, if they still today, or at least before they started hearing what Juneteenth was, the vast majority would have no idea.
Thank you for further making the argument that this needed to be a federal holiday.
I mean, yeah.
And yes, I agree. In general, Americans, particularly white Americans, are completely ignorant of the history of black people in this country and really need a thorough re-education on what it meant to be black in America and what it still means to be black in America. Agreed 100%. And to put a fine point on this, just to show how ignorant some people can be, despite Trump's claim that the holiday was not well known, that he had never heard of it, his White House has released a statement attributed to President Trump and First Lady Melania commemorating Juneteenth for each of the 3 years that he'd been in office up to that point. A fact that surprised Trump, and he paused to ask an aide if she had heard of Juneteenth. Oh, really? We put out a statement. The Trump White House put out a statement. Okay, good, was his response. So stupid and willfully ignorant that he didn't even know that they were putting out statements for the past 3 years commemorating Juneteenth Day, and he was entirely oblivious, no curiosity whatsoever. That man was our president for 4 years.
Yep. So then to answer Michael No's, I'm sure, super sincere question over Twitter, what is the significance of Juneteenth and what does it accomplish by making it a federal holiday?
And for all the Donald Trumps out there, let's talk about the history of Juneteenth Day. So what is it? In a broad sense, it's a celebration of the end of slavery in America. Why is it celebrated on June 19th? What happened on June 19th? I think we should first back up and talk about what the end of slavery is. If we're going to celebrate the end of slavery, what does that mean? What was the end of slavery?
So what does
in
actually,
America?
so what was the context around the event? So let's start on September 22nd, 1862, which is, well, the Emancipation Proclamation.
Which most people would say that was the end of slavery. Most people that don't really, just what they overview they got in school, that's Lincoln freed the slaves. He's the great emancipator. Emancipation Proclamation. That's when he freed the slaves.
But let's talk a little bit more about that. So, like Jason said, it was an executive order from President Abraham Lincoln declaring all slaves held in rebel states shall now be considered freed on January 1st, 1863. Now, you should also know this is taking place during the Civil War. So he had actually no jurisdiction over the Confederate Confederate states at the time. So slaves would have to actually escape up to the northern states in order for this to be considered freed. Historians actually estimated that around 500,000 slaves out of the total 3.9 million liberated themselves by escaping to Union lines between 1863 until the end of the war, and the rest remained still in slavery.
And also, because again, what did he declare? Only the slaves held in rebel states shall
Correct.
be considered free. Well, there were northern states that held slaves.
Correct.
Those slaves were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. There were slave states Maryland, Missouri, Delaware, New Jersey, Kentucky, and Tennessee, which was a Confederate state, but at this point in the war was actually under Union control. Those states were free to have slaves.
Then let's fast forward to April 9th, 1865. Robert E. Lee surrenders the Army of Northern Virginia in Appomattox, Virginia, which begins the end of hostility in the war, but the final Confederate surrendered was not until November 6, 1865.
And that was actually a Native American general that surrendered. There were a lot of Native American tribes that fought under the Confederacy.
Then in December 6, 1865, the 13th Amendment was ratified, abolishing slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime.
Which is important to note. We'll save that to the end, but just remember that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States except as punishment for a crime.
Exactly. And also this did not apply to Indian territories, which were the last to hold slaves until 1866.
I made a joke here. I wrote down, Europeans infected Native Americans with smallpox, gonorrhea, and chattel slavery. And I had to look up how to spell gonorrhea for this joke. So I hope you liked it.
It was hilarious. I appreciated it.
So those are all possible dates that you could celebrate the end of slavery. Why do we choose June 19th? Well, June 19th, 1865 was the announcement of General Order 3 by Union Army General Gordon Granger, proclaiming freedom for slaves in Texas.
This is where those Texas reps come into play.
So let's read the text of Order Number 3. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. And he means they should stay with their owners.
Yep.
They did not have their own homes. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. Just, you can't make it all positive. You have to take a jab at the slaves at the end of it, too. At that point, Texas had an estimated 250,000 slaves, with more than 150,000 having been moved from other areas in an attempt to avoid the Union advance. Texas was the westernmost and most remote state in the Confederacy. So people would actually take their slaves from other areas and try to essentially hide them in Texas, hoping that the Union Army would never get that far. And the date, June 19th, 1865, is when the Union Army finally was able to get into Texas and free essentially the last of the southern state-held slaves. This, of course, did not mean that former slaves were immediately treated as equals, particularly once the Union soldiers left the area.
What?
And I think it's important to think of what that would mean. You're a homeless, penniless freedman who's been denied education, and you're now being told that you're the employee of the person that owned you.
Yes.
Like, how horrible. That's not like, yay, great. I mean, sure, they were happy that they were quote unquote freed.
But it's not like they had a lot of options.
Right. It's not amazing. And despite that, Juneteenth celebrations were recorded as early as 1866, so the next year. They could have been considered an act of defiance against the violence and resentment they faced from their former owners. And that's something that I think is also important. They knew that their lives were going to be difficult, that they faced all sorts of problems, but yet they were still able to come together and celebrate this day that meant something to them. And that's the significance of it. If you want to say, like, to all those representatives, to all those conservative talking heads, that's why it's important. Now, celebrations continued. It was a local holiday in Texas. Some of the early celebrations would have included the participants dressing up in their finest clothes, something they couldn't do when they were slaves, so that became part of it. They held parades. They had readings of the Emancipation Proclamation. There were speeches from those who were formerly enslaved. They had religious sermons and spirituals. They ate barbecue, food that was generally considered for slaves, also the best food, if you ask me. Modern celebrations often emphasize red food and drink as an homage to African narratives and West African traditions. The color is said to be representative of strength and spirituality and carries great weight in many aspects of West African culture. You'll often see strawberry soda, red velvet cake, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Red foods and drinks. Then in 1872, former slaves Richard Allen, Richard Brock, Jack Yates, and Elias Dibble, together with money from the community, bought 10 acres of land for $800, specifically for use during Juneteenth celebrations, and they named it Emancipation Park. This is the oldest surviving park in Texas and is now a UNESCO Site of Remembrance. And this helped to fuel the spread of Juneteenth Day celebrations across the southern states.
So now let's fast forward to, we'll say, the turn of the century. As the great migration of southern blacks to the northern states took place, they brought the tradition of Juneteenth Day celebrations with them. Observance of the holiday actually suffered or became a little less or more popular based on the years, especially during World War II, because they kind of had a world war to fight during the time. And then actually interest picked back up in the early 70s, likely due to the civil rights movement, which makes perfect sense.
And I had heard specifically an account that said that this might have been due to Martin Luther King's assassination was in the middle of the Poor People's March, and they had, obviously people were kind of down after the assassination. The march kept going for a little while, and they decided to stop on June 19th, 1968, and that, the people from all over the country that were involved with the march then knew about the importance of June 19th because of that, and then took it back with them. Now, I'm not so sure on that, specifically because they mention Milwaukee,
Sure.
being one of the cities that was part of this influence. But as I'll say in a minute, that is not the correct, or at least the first-hand account of how the Milwaukee celebration began. So how did it begin? Well, Milwaukee's first Juneteenth Day celebration was in 1971 after an employee of the Northcutt Neighborhood House, which is a local community group that provides youth programs, job training. They've got a food pantry, things like that. After that employee visited a relative in the South during a Juneteenth celebration. And kind of uplifting, the Northcutt Neighborhood House is still around, and it still hosts the Milwaukee Juneteenth Day celebration 50 years later. So we do owe a debt of gratitude, certainly for the Northcutt Neighborhood House. If you're in the area, please look up how you can help them, maybe make a donation. Yeah, donate to the food pantry, whatever you can do. Moving into more the modern day, Juneteenth Day was recognized as a Texas state holiday in 1980, and that was followed by other states both making it state holidays and just recognizing it without making it a state holiday before it gained federal holiday status yesterday, Thursday the 17th. Only South Dakota did not at least recognize Juneteenth Day as a holiday. Recently, a couple months ago, North Dakota did. And only a few hours before the signing of the federal bill, Hawaii recognized the day. Now, Hawaii, I'll give a pass to. They have their own history about independence and the United States that should be reckoned with. Hopefully, we'll get to that in the future. But I don't think that South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem had those same things, even though, South Dakota certainly has a problematic history with independence and native peoples. But I don't think she had that in mind, seeing as how she also doesn't recognize science either. She's going to be running for president probably in 2024. Let's keep that in mind. So now the question, that's the history of Juneteenth Day. Now the question is, should Juneteenth Day be a national holiday?
I think before we actually talk about what our perspectives are on what Juneteenth should be, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I found online here.
We're the white male podcasters, Joe? I'm pretty sure we're the experts here.
Okay, sounds good. There's actually a really good article in the Wisconsin Examiner by Angela Davis, who is the founder and CEO of Block, or Black Leaders Organizing Communities in Milwaukee. She's absolutely fantastic. You should donate to that organization if you can. And she wrote an article saying that she has mixed feelings on Juneteenth. And her main concerns are that, sure, making Juneteenth a national holiday is great. It's fantastic. However, is it really something good when we still have all these issues that are constantly being ignored, that are consistently hurting the Black community and Black Americans all across the country? She actually referenced a tweet by W. Kamau Bell. You may have seen him from like CNN and like his various segments there.
He's had his own show.
Yes, exactly. And his tweet said, if dismantling white supremacy and ending racism was buying a new car, then a Juneteenth holiday is those weird lights underneath the car that turn on at night when you unlock the door. I mean, I'll take it, but that's not what I'm here for. That's not what I need. And there was also a tweet that was going around for a little while in like more progressive leftist circles that said, and this is by someone else, they painted BLM instead of defunding the police, clapped for essential workers instead of raising the wage, and made Juneteenth a holiday instead of making sure Black folks can vote. Always a symbolic victory instead of actual material change.
Which is a reasonable critique.
And I think that's kind of how it sums up my stance as well, where I think this is great. I think this is absolutely fantastic that we have Juneteenth as a national federal holiday. However, if we're going to continue to have mass incarceration, continue to make sure that Black communities have less voting power than white communities do, and we're going to constantly rig the system against them to do so, I don't know what victory this kind of is.
I agree. Just saying that Juneteenth Day is a federal holiday, people get off for it, and stopping there is doing nothing. So I believe it should be known as a day to educate all Americans that the end of slavery did not come with the Emancipation Proclamation.
Or the Civil War.
Or end with the Civil War. Or even with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Remember, we said to recall the text of that amendment, the end of it, except as punishment for a crime. We don't have the time today to talk about black codes and convict leasing, which took place well into the 20th century. Hopefully we'll get to that in a future episode. In fact, I guarantee we'll get to that in a future episode.
Totally.
There is a history of racism and violence and enslavement and unequal treatment of black people in this country. And what do we see from white conservative leaders?
Dismissal, usually.
Complete dismissal. And why is it important? Why do we have to talk about what divides us? Let's just get past it. Slavery was 150 years ago. Let's move on. We've never had a reckoning with truly the implications of slavery. That's the first step.
Well, and that's why we still have arguments right now about reparations.
Which needs to happen.
I agree.
Again, we've used the metaphor multiple times on the show. We did not all start on equal footing. Racial disparities that were started during slavery and continued with racist laws and practices throughout our nation's history are still prevalent today and still affect families today. And conservatives refuse, and even some liberals refuse to honestly examine that and do anything to remedy it because it means taking money from those who already have too much, already have more than they could possibly use, and giving it to people that have had nothing and have contributed to the wealth of the other group. That's not Marxism. That's not whatever kind of boogeyman you want to use. That's just
history.
It's some kind of recompense. It's a payment of a debt that can never be fully paid, but it's a start. And we have not even started. So is recognizing Juneteenth Day as a national holiday a fix for inequality and racial injustice? Certainly not. But it should hopefully be the start of the conversation.
Well, and I think it will. I think the fact that having Juneteenth as a federal holiday, giving people actually time off to do this, would just further emphasize how important it is to learn about these issues. So even though I know this is not what a lot of progressives and liberals want, I mean, they want it, but it's not going far enough. Like you said, Jason, I think this is a good place to start. And I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for people not taking action that should be taking action. But like in this last tweet that I read to you, Jason, when they just use vague terms like they painted BLM instead of defunding the police, I don't like that because it kind of starts giving out this idea that all sides are equal and all sides are just as bad as each other in this situation, which is definitely not true. Even though we have plenty of issues with Democrats who are not willing to do what it takes. I mean, hell, as of right now, we literally cannot get anything done because of 2 Democratic senators, and that's it. So to say that all of they or the entirety of Dem politicians are just responsible for things not getting done, it's just not true. And certainly they're not nearly as bad as what's going on the Republican side right now, who are actively trying to diminish what's going on by trying to ban critical race theory, by trying to make sure that we don't have any kind of historical record of this.
Yeah, when they say ban critical race theory, they mean don't talk about what we just talked about on this episode.
Well, especially when they don't know what critical race theory is, which is what we discussed last time. And that's because they don't care what critical race theory is. All they care about is that they don't want to talk about our country's racist history. So I want to make sure I get that point across too.
Because it makes white kids sad.
Right. It's just bullshit. I'm sorry. So I want to make sure to get that point across too. We live in a very large, diverse country. And in order for things to progress, they're going to take time. So yes, just like all of my progressive friends who are not happy because there's not enough done, or this seems like just another symbolic victory, which by the way, this is just another symbolic victory. We need to keep fighting. We need to keep doing these things. We need to keep educating. We need to keep marching. Otherwise, we're not going to have anything to strive for. We're not going to make any of the goals we want. We're not going to make any of the progress we want. The action comes down on us to do something. So let's do it.
And instead of our usual outro and outtakes, and not just to save myself the time of having to edit the outtakes, and in honor of Juneteenth Day, we'd like to close this episode with a reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. Whereas, on the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord, 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States, containing, among other things, the following to wit, that on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free, and the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons, or any of them, in any efforts they may make for their actual freedom, that the executive will, on the first day of January aforesaid, by proclamation, designate the states and parts of states, if any, in which the people thereof, respectively, shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and the fact that any state, or the people thereof, shall on that day be in good faith represented in the Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections wherein a majority of the qualified voters of such state shall have participated, shall, in the absence of strong countervailing testimony, be deemed conclusive evidence that such state, and the people thereof, are not then in rebellion against the United States.
Now, therefore, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, do on this first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, and in accordance with my purpose so to do, publicly proclaimed for the full period of 100 days, from the day first above mentioned, order and designate as the states and parts of states, wherein the people thereof respectively are this day in rebellion against the United States, the following to wit: Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, except the parishes of St. Bernard, Plaquemines, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James, Ascension, Assumption, Terrebonne, Laforte, St. Mary, St. Martin, and Orleans, including the city of New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia, and also the counties of Berkeley, Accomack, Northampton, Elizabeth City, York, Princess Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth, and which accepted parts and for the present left precisely as if this proclamation were not issued.
And by virtue of the power, and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are, and henceforth shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service.
And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed. Done at the city of Washington, the 1st day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 87th, by the President Abraham Lincoln.